Black Celts, zero proof, a revisionist rant. The Celts are Africans. The Black Celts, the African substratum theory. Jesus Christ, the Afrocentrists are back in a world where history-starved grifters hijack every civilization on Earth. Egypt, Greece, the Celts. Apart from Africans in mud huts, those are conveniently ignored. From the DEI-crazed communist professors who'd claim Stonehenge's Neolithic builders were African nomads, comes a con so deranged it'll gut history like an ancient aliens marathon. We Wuz civilization Afrocentric theft. Now truth gets burned alive. Anyway, the Celts erupted from the iron-clad peaks and salt-hustling valleys of Central Europe, the Hallstatt and Laterne hotbeds of Austria, Switzerland and southern Germany. They stormed into Britain and Ireland, stark naked and smeared in blue woad, their lime-spiked hair screaming death wish as they hacked foes to pieces with a glee that'd make a Roman legion piss himself. By the first millennium BC, Britain's tribes were hosting rowdy shindigs with vagabonds from the Rhine and France, a historian's dainty way of saying they'd wine and dine any scruffy wanderer before trading swords or sweet nothings. When Rome crashed the party, the Greeks called them 𝐃𝐿TOI, the Romans Galli, and Caesar, that pompous git, slapped on whatever name made his battles sound like a triumph. Same lot, brash, fearless, and too damn wild for trousers, hospitality or not. And yet, somehow this saga's been hijacked by revisionist nutters peddling a Celtic fantasy with all the historical truth of a sloshed bard's yarn at a Samhain feast. In the Black Celts, the African substratum theory, Ibrahim Ali blusters that new research techniques have confirmed Bob Quinn's Atlantean theory. These islands were cosmopolitan, composed of people who had more in common with the people of Northwest Africa and the southern Mediterranean. Yet Ali never names these new techniques, just regurgitating Quinn's 1980s guff about music, art, and boats sounding vaguely North African. No peer-reviewed study, DNA, or linguistics backs this tripe pure fantasy, served with a side of delusion. From there, the drivel snowballs. Ali bleats that the 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐢𝐻𝐵 spoke an African language that most likely belonged to the Hamato-Semitic family, and that the Celts are Africans. In this bonkers delusion, most Irish, Welsh, and Scots are under the illusion that they are Celts, a fake identity invented by 18th and 19th century academics. The book even claims Iron Age Britons show a close affinity with the African Guanches, Copts of Egypt, Pompeians, and the Etruscans. Obviously not Celts. Older pseudo-historians stoke the same rot. J.A. Rogers once scrawled that there were Negroes in Britain before Julius Caesar, that the Silures of Wales were of Phoenician or Egyptian descent, and that the word Moor always means Negro. Modern Afrocentrists parrot this tosh online, as if Celtic chariot riders swapped war tips with Saharan camel jockeys. But when we ditch the self-published drivel for cold hard science, the Afrocentric mirage implodes. Genetic data from ancient British and Irish skeletons show around 2500 BC, the Beaker people arrived from continental Europe, carrying a mix of steppe and Neolithic ancestry. They replaced over 90% of the local population, Europeans replacing earlier farmers whose distant DNA traced back to Anatolia, not Africa. Later migrations from the lower Rhine shaped what would become the genetic base of the Celtic world. Later Rhine migrations created the Celtic gene pool. A 2022 study smashes the nail in the coffin. We identify a large-scale migration into Britain during the Middle to Late Bronze Age with the source in the Lower Rhine. No sub-Saharan DNA in Iron Age or medieval graves. Zilch. Archaeology confirms this. Danebury, Dinas Powys and Tara's hill forts brim with European metals, pots and torques, not Sahara trinkets, as if Celtic chieftains would swap their shiny neck torques for some Timbuktu tat. So who were the Celts? They were Europe's storytellers, tribes whose art, myth and language still live on in the culture of Ireland and Brittany. And who were they not? Not some African clan, not a wandering Hamitic mob, and definitely not the wet dreams of revisionist loons. No surprise some want to nick their glory. The Celts, the Welsh, Scots, English and Irish, tribes who, mixed with Anglo-Saxons, forged nations that birthed philosophy, science, exploration and empire. Basically the blueprint for modern-day civilization. Who wouldn't want a piece of that? The Black Celts myth is just another sad grab at Europe's story, and it always lands on the same daft punchline: We Wuz Celts. We Wuz chosen, the Afrocentric scripture swindle. This We Wuz idea is wonderfully straightforward. Take the Bible, cross out the original characters, scribble your own name in the margins, and voila, divine ancestry. Enter William Saunders Crowdy, ex-slave, part-time preacher and full-time visionary who apparently woke up one glorious Kansas morning and decided that God had just sent him a spoiler alert. African Americans are the real Israelites. Out of all the nations in the desert, the Almighty apparently went, "Yes, Kansas, that's my spot." So Crowdy founded the Church of God and Saints of Christ, preaches a few barn-burning sermons, prints a few pamphlets, and poof, Israel is reborn somewhere between Topeka and the cornfields. You can almost hear Moses groaning, 40 years in the desert, and now a self-made prophet nicked my story. Next stop, Harlem. One generation later, Wentworth Arthur Matthew takes the baton, polishes it, and upgrades the nonsense. Robes, check scrolls, check historical evidence. Oh, don't be ridiculous. He solemnly assures his followers, black Jews were the original Jews, white Jews were the descendants of the fabled Khazar kingdom. With one flourish, Europe's Jews become late-stage converts, Africa turns into the promised land, and reality quietly gathers its belongings and slips out the back door. Then come the 1960s, a decade of incense, afros, and spontaneous prophecy. Enter Ben Ami Ben Israel, Chicago steelworker by day, self-declared messiah by, well, lunch. Having decided the factory floor lacks sufficient apocalypse, he rallies hundreds and leads them into the Negev desert. When you're founding a new civilization, why not start somewhere designed to cook both your sandals and your sanity? He declares, we must question every facet of existence under Euro-Gentile domination. All things must be brought to the sons of God for naming and renaming. Which is theological shorthand for, we've stolen the crayons and now we're redrawing the map. But our man Ben Ami isn't content with renaming things. No, he identifies the true villain. Liberal democracy poses the greatest threat to the continued existence of the human family. Well, perhaps he has a point with this one, but every numbskull can be right once or twice. His followers now see themselves as the righteous remnant, valiantly besieged by a wicked, Euro-Gentile civilization. Their pamphlets drip with end-times melodrama, part scripture, part revenge fan fiction, each page shrieking that the world must be turned upside down immediately, preferably before tea, and definitely before anyone asks for evidence. Pamphlets began fluttering about like confetti at a particularly delusional wedding. Headlines screamed, Black Hebrews, the original people of the book. Pamphlets from the Church of God and Saints of Christ, and later the Commandment Keepers in Harlem, confidently proclaimed that archaeological discoveries have proven Abraham was a black man. Which discoveries? Ah yes, the famous Trust Me Bro tablets of Mesopotamia, the ones that don't name Abraham, don't show his face, and don't exist outside of pamphlets. Next, they wheel out poor Tacitus, kidnapped from the 1st century, and have him shout across 2 millennia that Jews were an Ethiopian race. Never mind context, who needs that when you've got a highlighter and an agenda? Tacitus never described Jews as Africans. In Histories 5, he lists several rumours about their origin, one of which mentions Ethiopia. Citing that as proof is deliberate misreading. By the 1970s, this biblical improv troupe had set up shop on 1 West, 125th Street, complete with megaphones, militant sunglasses, and the subtlety of a fire alarm. Out came the declarations. White people are the offspring of Satan, modern Jews are imposters, and the Book of Revelation is basically a Yelp review for the synagogue of Satan. They quote, they shout, they point at pedestrians. It's evangelism meets paramilitary cosplay. So the message is simple. Redemption isn't forgiveness, it's payback. Payback for what you may ask. Or giving them technology and civilization, I suppose. In their promised land, slavery makes a comeback, only with a new slave list. Every verse they quote sounds like they're filing a complaint with God. Dorman's chosen people shows something far less divine, an identity built from fragments of borrowed glory until the mirror finally smiled back and said, "We were Hebrews." When you failed DNA class but aced Delusion, the Sumerian edition, the civilization of Sumer was not Asian at all, it was African. The black man carried the torch of culture from the Nile to the Euphrates. Kushite origins of Sumer and Elam, Dr. Joseph ben Johanan. We're told the Nile handed the torch to the Euphrates, a poetic image if you ignore the part where they're 2,000 kilometers apart and separated by deserts that kill caravans faster than modern Afrocentrism kills logic. Meanwhile, the real Sumerians, whoever they were busy building the blueprint for civilization. They mapped the stars, divided time into hours, they brewed beer, tracked the planets, and turned wet clay into the first libraries on Earth. Samuel Noah Kramer, an actual expert, not a YouTube oracle with a ring light, said Sumerian civilization came from earlier Mesopotamian peoples. But try explaining that to the modern mythographers. They open a textbook the way drunks open a fridge, searching for something that isn't there, but convinced they'll find it anyway. "Black-headed people," they cry, pointing at the translation like it's a DNA test. Never mind that black-headed meant dark hair, not melanin. By that logic, half of Europe was Sumerian too. By the late 20th century, Afrocentric theorists like Runako Rashidi and Chancellor Williams declared that Sumer wasn't Mesopotamian at all, but African. Rashidi assured readers that there is a substantial body of evidence in support of the position that the civilization of Sumer was the product of black migrations from Africa's Nile Valley, adding that the black contribution was decisive and far overshadowed that of the later invaders. In his version, the Sumerians' description of themselves as the black-headed people was read like a birth certificate. They must have been one of the many Nilotic Kushite colonies established in early Asia. Apparently, whole nations were being franchised out of the Nile. Shame the archaeology refuses to cooperate. Archaeologist Georges Roux, in ancient Iraq, obliterated the theory with one line: there is no such thing as a Sumerian race, neither in the scientific nor in the ordinary sense of the term. Sumerian, he explained, means a language, not a bloodline. The appellation Sumerians should be taken as meaning Sumerian-speaking people and nothing else. All efforts to define and to assess the relations between Sumerians and Semites in other fields than philology are doomed to failure. Translation: stop being a dumbass. The skulls pulled from Sumerian graves show the usual Near Eastern mix, Armenoid and Mediterranean types. The statues, bearded, stylized, generic. As Roux noted, physical features depicted on monuments are largely conventional and have therefore no real value. Only a massive tool would think it's a portrait gallery. Really, it's symbolism carved in limestone. Even the language thinks these people are a bit slow. Sumerian is a linguistic orphan, a language isolate, agglutinative in structure, related to no known tongue, African or otherwise. Roux explains, the Sumerian language is agglutinative. Thompson and Hayes showed the same pattern, structurally closer to ancient Elamite or Hurrian than anything along the Nile. The grammar doesn't migrate, it stands alone. And then there's the DNA, the Great Equalizer. Studies by Lazaridis et al. 2022 and Scortenioti et al. 2020 found that ancient West Asians formed a Neolithic continuum of ancestry mirroring the geography of West Asia, mixing Anatolian, Caucasus and Levantine lineages, but not African ones. The earliest farmers in northern Iraq show the same pattern, as Haber et al. 2017 confirmed. Present-day Lebanese derive most of their ancestry from a Canaanite-related population, proving continuity, not invasion. The evidence couldn't be easier to see for someone with an IQ over 60. Sumer rose from West Asian soil. The builders of were Mesopotamian farmers, not Nile colonists. Their art, their words, their bones, and now their genomes all say the same thing. They were homegrown. And yet here we are, 3 goddamn thousand years later, still listening to plebs chanting the same delusion. We Wuz Sumerians.